You thought that because you have MRKH, that you're lucky to have somebody who accepts you for that?
Even if it means me having to suffer. Yeah. Yeah, because what man would want a woman who was a freak?
Welcome to The Lifestyle Prescription. I'm Rena Annabelle. Let me start by asking you a question. What is it that makes a woman? Like, biologically, what are the things that make someone a woman? And what if all those things that you had been told would make you a woman were suddenly taken away from you? This is what happened to my guest, Ally Hensley, who at the tender age of 16 discovered that she'd been born without a womb and a vagina. Ally was diagnosed with a condition called MRKH, and after initially struggling to accept that diagnosis, Ally now advocates for others who have this condition as well, and she has written this book. It's called Vagina Uncensored, a memoir of missing parts, and as you can see by the post-it notes that I have put in here whilst reading, we have a lot to talk about. So Ally, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to get stuck into the world of vaginas.
Yes. I really like this book, and
Thank
I feel
you.
it's a really powerful book. Your story kind of just blew me away, and I mean, I want to go into like how you feel with this being out there, but first of all, for people that don't know, what is MRKH? What does it stand for, first of all? I didn't want to say it in case I actually pronounced it wrong.
And it's not the easiest, and it's certainly not the most glamorous medical condition in terms of its definition. So it's Mayer-Rokitansky-Küster-Hauser syndrome, named after the 4 founding physicians who first sort of gave it its name, if you like, and established this as a condition. It's congenital, which means it's present at birth, and it affects 1 in 5,000 females. The gestation period, around 6 to 8 weeks, where our vital organs are being formed, for my mother saying gestation. It's a congenital condition, meaning it's present at birth. And in the gestation period of 6 to 8 weeks, where our vital organs are being formed, that's when I almost describe it as you're traveling down the genetic path. And in that genetic path at 6 to 8 weeks, it hits a pothole. And that pothole is where the reproductive system is forming. So I was born with ovaries, and that meant my XX chromosomes were firing. And typically we form externally and then internally. However, when it hit the fallopian tubes, when it hit the womb, cervix, vaginal canal, that did not form. However, the reason that I found out that I had MRKH is because I failed to receive a period. So externally, you'd never know then, and you'd never know now that I was born with this condition. So that is, in a nutshell, MRKH.
So let's go back to before you got that MRKH diagnosis. What made you worried about yourself? Were you waiting to get a period?
Essentially, I mean, I read all the magazines, I read the books. People are talking at school about when am I going to come on, and I wasn't a athletic person. I wasn't desperately underweight. There was no reason that my period didn't arrive. I did go and see the GP, and they just said, you might be a late starter. So I went away. Now, to be honest, that I have been so frank in the book, there were experiences on sort of in parallel to that. So I did attempt, above the age of 16, consensual, to have intercourse, which just didn't happen. I mean, he gave it a bit of a go, but it just didn't, because there was no vaginal entry. Like, they call it a dimple, so it was the length of my fingernail, so it's not very big. That was basically the length, I guess half an inch. I had tried to, I guess, explore my body. I wouldn't necessarily, it was through like pleasure or masturbation or anything like that, but I did try to sort of explore my body and see if it looked like the school books or the rare piece of porn that, you come across as a teenager. Again, I didn't think anything of it. But I did go back to the doctors, and they said, okay, well, now I think we probably need to do a bit of investigatory medical sort of treatments or procedures. I had a ultrasound, and I think it was then the sonographer kind of looked and went and left the room. And then I went to have a laparoscopy in Reading, the Royal Berks Hospital, where they put a a camera into your belly button. And I remember, and it's always like the big thing that I always say, when the doctor drew the curtain around my bed and nobody else's, that there was something wrong. And it's the weird details that you remember, like he was using a pencil. I mean, now we use iPads, but he was just drawing this diagram of what my body didn't have. And I did look over to my mum, and she looked profoundly perplexed, sad, but overwhelmed at the news that she just received. And that essentially was that her daughter had been born without these body parts that are going to literally probably change my life forever. It was just too much to comprehend.
So when you got this diagnosis, after that diagnosis, like you're 16, you've been waiting for a period, you tried to have sex, all these kind of things, and then you're told you have these missing parts, as it were. How did that make you feel?
I don't think that I had the capacity to feel. You know, when something's just so big that you don't have a previous experience to benchmark it against. I don't think that I knew the severity of the diagnosis. In fact, I don't think I knew the severity of the diagnosis until I was well in my 20s. But immediately there were options talking about if I wanted to become a parent. And I think at 16, you're at this junction of womanhood, this rite of passage. To become a mother, you think, oh, this is going to be ABC 1, 2, 3. To be a sexual partner, you think it would just be simply having sex. And so when those two things had disappeared, I guess, off my future trajectory, I just couldn't comprehend what type of woman, if I was a woman. I knew biologically I was a woman, but we're so heavily defined by what we can do as a woman. I didn't really know what my future looked like. I just remember there was like an immediate consultation that if I wanted to create my own vagina, I would have to go through treatment. Fortunately, in the UK, we do have the NHS, and so I was referred down the right pathway to a really great specialist hospital in London. And it happened quite quickly. I would say too quickly in retrospect, and I always think that now with any diagnosis. I mean, we're talking weeks. And I did say yes. I wasn't being forced or pressurized, but we don't know, or we didn't know about MRKH, what we do now. And I think creating vagina as a child is a very complex issue, more than just what I underwent. I didn't want to go down the surgical path.
What, when they surgically make you a vagina?
They surgically make a vagina. So there are different procedures called the Makindo, which uses, skin graft. There's more barbaric type of procedures. Fortunately, they're not really sort of done in the UK, let's just say, but 95% of people do not need to go through surgery. And if you go through the surgery, you still have to vaginally dilate after anyway because of the scar tissue. So I think a lot of people do want to go through surgery because you're under an anesthetic and you just have to not be awake for the part that you don't want to have to acknowledge. Whereas vaginal dilation, which is I chose to do as an inpatient for 3 days and then went home to complete my vaginal process of 9 months, pretty much looked like a vaginal kit. And they're different sizes, so maybe that size and quite slim.
So what are these things?
It was like they use plastic, but then it was like latex. So they're like test tubes, but full, like dense. Mm-hmm. And you are told to lie on your back, open your knees in a diamond shape, get the dilator and essentially insert it into the dimple. And often do in-person podcasts. It's really great to kind of use my hand gestures if you like. But it was basically if I was using my thumb to press into my palm of my hand and there's the blood is draining out of my knuckle, that probably even more so. And that's the pressure that you have to push this in for 20 minutes, morning and night.
Was that really painful?
Do you know what? It wasn't. Well, it probably was, but that's not what took over my mind. It was the sheer immense of feeling of shame, of embarrassment, of intrusiveness. I think my thoughts were overriding the pain factor. I'm sure, of course, it was painful trying to push something into your body, but it's weird how you can, and this is not a great side effect of vaginal dilation, is because you learn to disassociate from your body. Because in order to do that for me, I had to find a way to separate myself from the process.
Right. Yeah.
And when I was in hospital, I remember a psychologist once said to me, if I could travel back and work with you at any point of your life, it would have been in those 3 days. That really is where the damage started and sort of not left off, because it continued. But I learnt how to associate pain with progress. So the more pain, the more pressure, the more progress, the more successful. Yeah. I learnt that intimacy is clinical and shameful. That I essentially lost my virginity with myself. And only now, and this is quite probably something I would place as a trigger warning, I have not ever been a victim of sexual assault or sexual abuse. However, I have determined that it felt like a form of self-assault, because the way that I have framed intimacy and sex, not so much in the last few years, thanks to a really good dose of therapy, but it really had the symptoms of hating sex, not being present for sex.
The disassociation of your body.
The complete disassociation, because that's what I learned, and that's the pathway that I had built in my brain in order to be intimate with someone. And God, it's really weird. Like I have curves, and I have big boobs, but there is nothing of that era from 16 to my late 20s that I felt like a woman, and I certainly didn't feel worthy, and I certainly didn't feel desirable.
That's a long time to feel like that as well.
Yeah, a massively long time. Hence why that, I guess what we'll move on to, but it was a lot for a young person to comprehend in the absence of knowledge about the psychological impact of MRKH, trying to fit into the world, pretty much through the use of denial, self-medicating. I would throw myself into, as I said in the book, I got a job in a pub very early on, which is a great place to get lost because everyone's drunk, no one cares who you are. I got myself into very, very high-risk, dangerous situations because I was just trying to process such magnificent information without any tools of my own. So it was a very long time to be unhappy, but is it a good reminder? Probably is a good reminder of why I do the work I do now. I always say my experience was good enough in the sense that it didn't completely destroy me, but bad enough that I can relate enough to want to do the work with women who are diagnosed with MRKH now.
Did you know anyone at that time who had also been diagnosed with MRKH?
No one.
This is like, I think you're a bit younger than me, but it's before social media, it's before all of that, right?
I think there was like a Yahoo account maybe like 5 years after, I can't remember. I didn't even really look for it though. There was one support group at the hospital, and I was so angry. And I was like, Mum, I don't need to be here. I'm not going to be here. Like everyone's like, boo-hoo. I was so angry. That's not who I am as a person. I just didn't want to identify myself with this condition. And therefore, I decided not for it to be a part of my dialogue. I would tell a partner just so they knew that I couldn't have their child. But that's pretty much where it started and stopped. And that's why I chose relationships who weren't really looking for commitment from me emotionally. I was looking for partners who were not looking for a mother to be there, a mother of their child. I was looking for people who they weren't the best. And I think I was doing that to validate why I felt so shit about myself and why I wasn't worthy. Another trigger warning, I was in a very domestic violent relationship from the age of 19 through to 25. I didn't see anything wrong with that. And isn't that sad that I didn't think that was bad behaviour? I thought, well, I should be lucky enough that someone takes me on. So if that comes with sadness and destruction and pain and mistreatment, then so be it.
So you thought that because you have MRKH, that you're lucky to have somebody who accepts you for that? Even
if it means me having to suffer. Yeah. Yeah, because what man would want a woman who was a freak?
Oh, is that what you... God.
Yeah.
Friends at the time, when you were in your teenage years, did you tell them what was going on? Did anyone know, apart from your parents?
I think a few close friends. Parents is always really hard. Because how many teenage girls or boys even talk to their parents about, you know, the most intimate parts of their discovery in their lives. I always think it's funny how, not funny, haha, but how my parents were downstairs trying desperately to pretend that life was normal.
And you were upstairs
when I was at
vagina. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd come down and I would be really pleased because I just moved on to the next size. And they were, you know, and the way that I knew that is because I probably emptied the village of all its KY jelly because I had to use lube, and that was my marker. It became a little bit more of a, like, I guess, a spirit level of how much progress. And then when I got onto the biggest, I was like, oh my God, I'm here. But yet again, it's still, I didn't allow myself. I mean, I got drunk quite a lot in my bedroom at night doing it, and my poor parents were doing their best to navigate this, but they didn't have a book. And interestingly, now people say it's almost better to treat your child, yes, of course, like they have MRKH, and give them support, but also treat them like a child. Keep the boundaries, keep the discipline, because that in itself enforces that they're not different. Whereas I kind of ran riot for quite a long time. And they would have felt guilt and uncertainty about how to navigate their child creating a vagina, and knowing that they wouldn't be grandparents if it was to go, you know, if that's the path that I chose not to obviously go through myself. But not really with friends, a few school friends maybe. But weirdly, since the book came out, some school friends have come up to me and said, I am so sorry that I didn't know what was going on. But we don't really peer into the eyes of our school peers and try to work out what's going on at home. We're learning how to be humans.
Everyone's got their own thing going on, right? And that seems like a big thing to them, whatever's going on in their life.
Yeah.
You went down quite a dark spiral though, didn't you, in terms of self-harm and that kind of thing, and issuing another trigger warning at this point.
Yes, so many trigger warnings. Let's blanket trigger warning statement. Yes, I did. I started self-harming when I was about 16, so shortly after my diagnosis, and that went on till about 26. People always have this really dark misconception about self-harm, which I can understand, and go, how could you possibly want to mutilate your body? And again, it's not that, and it's not about pain. It's about letting some air out the tires, and that for me was what I experienced when I did it. And of course, I look down at my scars now that I see every day. Is it a reminder? It's not. No, I feel a sense of shame, but I also have to have a sense of self-forgiveness. But yes, I did. I developed a really bad relationship with food. I tried to, I mean, I say tried, I anorexia, but very short space of time, headed into bulimia, abused alcohol. I mean, it literally was anything and everything I can do to F up. I was like a moth to a flame. But that, again, was just probably the demonstration of a very, very troubled, sad woman, young woman. Yeah.
Did you get any therapy at that time?
No. No, I did. I got a spot because I was really overeating and I hated myself even more, and I was putting on weight. And I did have therapy. My mum always sources really good therapists. There was someone in Oxford and I saw her and I just skipped over the MRKH, and she's like, can we just back up a bit? And again, it wasn't like I was trying to be in denial of it in that way. I just didn't think it was important. And I guess that's when I realised how big it was. But no, essentially from diagnosis to 30 was a no-go zone for MRKH. It was just self-destructive. I do not know how. I mean, I was a hard worker and that was a very good work ethic, but I was living on a tightrope and just trying to really stay on it, because falling off was what, as you've seen in the book, I did some pretty hairy stuff. Traveling up to London to see if I could become a prostitute, and then deciding that when I sobered up probably wasn't the best idea.
Why did you do that?
It's interesting, actually. No one's really asked me that. Maybe because they haven't got there. So thanks for having the guts. To be of service. Sex, again, is a bit of a validation tool. When I made my vagina, I just wanted to make sure that it worked. I'd never wanted to go into dilation ever again. So regular sex, be it in the less than healthy ways. again, it was like desperation. I kind of think it was all these weird cry for helps, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know how that could be because that's a sliding doors moment. Like, I literally had a guy that was waiting to meet me in London, and I just got so far and then thought and sobered up and went back to the pub to join the group of people that I left, including my boyfriend at the time. And they didn't know, and I never spoke of it. But yeah, it was wanting to be hurt. Why did I want someone? I don't know. I'll bring it up with my therapist on Friday. Yeah, but just kind of validation of the negative kind.
In terms of relationships and sex and intimacy, so you have talked a little bit about it, and the whole disassociation from what the pleasure side of it. Was it enjoyable ever? Because you've said some things which make me think that it wasn't for a long time.
Maybe superficially,
Right.
orgasm. But was it intimate? No. And I was really worried that people would work out what was wrong with me. They would know that my vagina wasn't the same as all the other women's. Now, let's kind of look at vaginas kind of separate from this. I remember doctors saying men don't actually, I can't say I'm not a man, but the men I've spoken to don't necessarily compute one vagina versus is this a man-made or is this natural. It wasn't that, but I would have to be slightly inebriated to have sex because I didn't want them to work out or to look at me, because this was still someone who didn't belong in the body that I was in. I had the self-harm and I didn't feel particularly attractive. I mean, I did enjoy sex, and I can't say that I went through every experience never wanting to, because then I wouldn't have done it, I guess, if there was an element of no pleasure. But pleasure is a funny thing. I think when you don't like yourself, you don't think pleasure is something that it's conflicting. And I think that's why so many people do openly talk about pleasure in a completely different way, for women to feel empowered by pleasure, to kind of want it, own it, and not just be offered it, I think.
Did you, for a long time, did you just not feel like a woman? And did you, and how have you then come to terms with all of this? Like, where are you now from how you used to think about yourself?
Oh, 100% a woman. Like, that sounds really silly. But there was 15 years between that mentality ending and the person I guess I am here today. When I moved to Australia when I was 26, I was on the run. I think a lot of expats who find themselves in Australia are people on the run, or at least that's my experience in Bondi Beach. I say it's like the Mecca for misfits, because we're all on a spiritual path. We're all trying to like find ourselves. We feel probably a bit outcast by something. There's been a trauma, I think, or at least the people I've met, and I'm so sorry for those, but I'm pretty much sure you'll own it. There was my boyfriend at the time started to work more away from home, and it gave me an opportunity. I was 10,000 miles away from home. I had no friends, but he started to work away, and I didn't feel lonely. I felt liberated. And that was the first time I actually felt like I could start being safe in my own company and not relying upon a man to rescue me and control me in the face of my own inability to control myself. And I remember just writing a blog to a wonderful charity over in America called The Beautiful You, and I called it Becoming Ally. And there was a lot of regret, and there was a few like dabbles in online forums when Facebook first came out. And I shared this blog, and I don't know what, I was tired of being sad. And I always say that line of, I'm tired of being a passenger in life, like being on a conveyor belt and watching everyone do happy. And I just didn't know how to access happy. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for my relationship, which is good. And we're still friends. He's very happy and married. And then I decided to reach out to a hospital looking for support, knowing that London had done it so well, despite me turning my back on it once. And that's what we did. And it was like the most, I want to say effortless, because it was hard work, but nothing had felt more right in my life than to become an MRKH advocate in a country that was fairly new in terms of MRKH. I realised that fundraising And fancy events was not the priority. The priority was to start talking about the word vagina and uterus, because until we could grasp those two major factors of MRKH, everything would be pointless. And I think that's the way I've done advocacy. It's not that I'm trying to create clickbait headlines. I'm not trying to have shock factors. I'm just simply trying to say what that is. And there's been many headlines over the years. Some from newspapers, I just won't even read the article because I'm just like, this gross. But, and usually they're not interviews that I've given, I should say. They're usually like syndicated. But it's, girl born without vagina. And I used to think, oh my God, how could they be so crass? And I'm thinking, well, actually, no, they've hit the nail on the head. It's uncomfortable to read and it's uncomfortable to see. And some people with MRKH are not so happy with the way that I advocate. But that's my story, and I'm talking for my story. And I think fertility and infertility is massively hard and rife. 1 in 8 couples. It's everywhere, and it's usually in secret. However, I think infertility is palatable. Sexual function, sexual pleasure, vagina's not so palatable. And for me, it's about, I always say the only thing normal in this world is difference. And there are so many women
100%.
With gynae issues. I went to a really great Eva Peel charity event in London the other week, and we're talking about vaginas, and we're talking about stigma, and we're talking about these words, and they are really affecting women's health and the ability to access and advocate for their own health. And it's an epidemic in that way. So that's the way I advocate.
And let's just say, well, I just want to make clear that obviously, you've been in the UK where you got treatment and you started this journey, and then you went to Australia and you started doing advocacy work. But then there are lots of countries in the world you're not going to be offered, oh, do you want to make your own vagina? You won't get that, right?
Shocking.
So do you do anything to kind of help those people, and what is it?
So in 2016, I was quite well established, I think, in a certain presence, if you like, about MRKH. I don't want to say people knew my name. That sounds really wanky, but I think I just started to stand out as somebody who was really passionate about this cause. I then messaged the Beautiful You, where it all began, and I said to the CEO there, Dr. Amy Lossy, I think that we need to start looking at the global footprint of MRKH. I feel very privileged in Australia. I feel very lucky within the UK and America that there is access to healthcare. Despite being taboo and stigmatized and difficult, there is access and there is options. And I feel very privileged as a white woman, a white cis woman, to be able to have these options, and it's still hard. So then I thought, God forbid, what's happening in other countries? And we started to explore, and we would all get messages from people from China and say, Indonesia and Bangladesh, and we just, of people struggling and having nobody to talk to, and the shocking stories that you hear from these countries. We helped a woman get refugee status in America, actually. She had been from Bangladesh, she went to China, and her life was, for her, it was just unlivable. The shame, she couldn't return home. There's a lovely advocate in Africa, and she would talk about how there was witchcraft introduced, that if you put a woman within a MRKH in the sun, the uterus will grow. There's stories about, honor killings in India. There's stories about the way that, people are sort of removed from communities. Now, I'm not knocking that in a critical way, because I understand cultural diversity, minority opinion. That is the culture, and I can't say that I'm better than that, because it's people.
But there's also basic human rights, though, isn't
But there's basic human rights. And I think for me, it's just trying to not insult that culture and not insult, and try to see it through my eyes, because that would be really judgmental, clumsy and insulting, yeah. But I think it's also about demonstrating what MRKH truly is and what the options are. I remember there was a woman in Afghanistan quite a number of years ago, and a group of us in MRKH, we were trying to figure out how to get dilator kits there, because they weren't available to people with MRKH. And we were talking, and we're not medical professionals, But in the absence of, we were talking through how best the dilatory process could work. And I've spoken to hundreds of women around the world about their experiences. And also, like, there are people, not just necessarily countries, there are people of age groups. There was a woman in the south of France, and she was 70. Mary, her name was. Oh, my God, we spoke. It's kind of like, I wish I could find her now. But I don't have her number. Mary, if you're listening, she had been abused as a child, and she had got married to a really, really lovely man, but she never had gone through any form of sex dilation. She hadn't created a vagina. And she said to me, like 72, she's like, Ali, am I ever going to experience an orgasm? And I was like, I've got goosebumps actually just thinking about her. Because there are people in the world who are just figuring out now they've got MRKH and they've had no intervention, they've had no diagnosis. There's diagnosis such as people who are told that they don't have a vaginal canal, but they won't do the full investigatory side of things. So they don't know that they don't have a uterus, but they go down the plastic surgery route, which then can be hugely botched because the person doing the cosmetic surgery doesn't appreciate the anatomy of MRKH. There's so many stories. And I think that's why, I mean, global MRKH has sort of softened a little bit, I think, after COVID and things like that. But it's definitely something I want to revitalize, because I don't want to recycle what we know is good. England is amazing. We've got advocates. It's brilliant. So I think let that machine go and let's start doing some outreach.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So social media must be quite a powerful tool for you with all of this.
It is a powerful tool. And I think with the way that we can talk about, I mean, we know censorship is obviously censorship online. However, there are people that don't go to TikTok and they don't rely on Instagram. And I also think it's about working with the medical community, healthcare professionals, people outside of the social media network, because they're likely to be the people to refer through to peer support. So I'm always looking for new ways to invent MRKH advocacy out of the grid, let's say.
Yeah. Let's talk about this book. Okay, so this is such an honest and raw account of what you have been through, right? How did you feel when this was published and put out into the world? Did you feel kind of exposed? I know you're trying to tell this story, but I kind of thought, I put myself in your shoes and thought, wow, how did Ali feel when you know that this is out there?
Oh, well, I had already done a fair bit of writing and some media prior to the book coming out. So I had heard and seen reactions from people when I talk about MRKH and vaginas and uteruses and infertility and wonky relationships, which I'm very familiar with. It's weird, actually. I finished writing it in the July of 22. And then I'd gone on to get an agent and then the publishing process. So I hadn't read it for a little while, actually, but it wasn't until I started the pre-publication process. To me, the launch day felt like a bittersweet, if I'm honest. I mean, I had the most amazing book launch in London with an amazing select group, but I only had so much budget. But really great group of people, advocates, friends, school friends, best friends, writers, editors. And it was insane. It was the best day. It was one of the best days of my life. But after then, and I sometimes call the book a she, like I've called it its own being, like she, like enjoy her, where's she off to now? She's at Las Vegas, she's in LA, she's in Australia. It's like when you've, I don't know because I haven't got a kid, but I can imagine if you've raised a child and you've put all your effort into making sure that they're the best version of themselves, they have their boundaries, they have their values, there's quality in there, there's honesty in there, and then you take the child to university and you leave it at the front gates and go, I really hope that they've learned everything they can and they have a really great experience and they do really good in the world. That's how I felt about my book going out. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't feel scared that people were going to read the stories. My dad desperately wanted a copy of the book and I was really withholding, and it's kind of like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Yeah. But I did give it to him for Christmas, and he was so happy. And I just hugged him and I said, "You don't have to read it." And he said, "Thank you," because he doesn't want to read those stories. But he was really proud. So that's what it felt like, putting Vagina Uncensored out into the world. And it's weird because I'm a writer, I'm a creative, I'm not a marketer by trade. So it's a totally different process. But, you know, as a writer, like, writing on your own is kind of overwhelming. And I feel like it's writing with a therapist, or, well, in therapy without a therapist. It's tough. The process was harder in parts than I realised, because you have to relive everything to get the content out, and then pick and choose how you explain it. But there were some pretty hairy moments where I was like, oh my God, that's so sad.
Well, I felt the pain in some of these parts of your book. And I want to talk about one of the things that you wrote really openly and honestly about, which was motherhood, and, you know, that you'd wanted to be a mom for so long. And then, and you even had a name for, you had a name for your future baby. What was that?
I can feel myself welling up.
Oh, Ally. Okay, so, you know, you wanted to be a mom for so long.
Yes.
You had a name for your baby, your future baby, Esme. And where are you now in terms of acceptance, or whether that's something that you still want?
The book is closed. The book is closed on motherhood for me, at least in, you know, I might meet someone with children and then it's a different type of motherhood. I don't know. But God, that was hard, because I had the money in the bank. As I said, I had the money for surrogacy, because it's not the cheapest pathway to motherhood. But then, you know, through personal situations, there was a choice where I needed to find money, and that was the money. And I really grieved her that night. It was hard. I think I cried all night when I wrote that, and actually said goodbye to her. She is real to me. She's a concept. I just haven't met her on this earth. That book that chapter's closed. I am beyond now the motherhood threshold, in the sense of, will I, won't I? I will not. However, I think that infertility grief and the loneliness is something that I am constantly navigating. I always knew it would be a hard era. I didn't think it would be a hard decade, and 40s is a really hard, because people have their children, they're busy, they have a purpose, they have noise, and I don't ever think for 1 second it's easy to deal with children every day, or it's hard. I can only imagine Sunday mornings, but I just I'd love those moments, and I'd love the choice. I'd love to do a pregnancy test. I'd love to know what labour feels like, maybe just for a few minutes, not the whole whack of because I know that people go, how could you possibly say that? It's experiences. It's those experiences that I really would like to have, that I feel like, I'm not going to use the word normal, typical women have, but that is closed for me now.
But I want to just put it out there that people who have MRKH can have kids, in terms of, you have the ovaries, right?
100%.
The ovaries are there. So it's a case of IVF. So getting a surrogacy. Is it
yes.
a surrogacy?
Yes.
Taking your eggs and
the sperm, and then planting it in someone else's bun. It's a process that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of awareness around fertility now. There's adoption, which is a bit of a different process. Again, it all takes time. You'll never meet a more passionate couple or intended parents than those who've really had to fight for their child. And yet it's almost like there's the most hurdles for them. But there's also, as we know, the uterus transplants, that, the first successful live birth happened this year from the first uterus transplant in the UK. In fact, we've got the surgeon coming to our event in London in July who did the transplant. So there are options. And yes, people with MRKH can have. And some people have said, are we infertile? Because we have got ovaries. But yeah. But there are.
You just can't carry your
just
own
can't
baby,
carry that. Just can't carry the child. So there are options. And I don't want people to feel despondent, because if you really do want that baby, you will get that. You will. How? I'm not quite sure, but you will.
To those who are currently going through a time where they don't feel like a woman, maybe they have MRKH like you, or maybe it's something else, what would you want to say to them?
Well, try to remove yourself from society standards, which I know is really hard, because everything there is so much around us that we don't realise we say, or people, they don't realise the words that they're putting to things that can make people who aren't formed or made or can do the things as a typical woman. I think actually, for people who don't feel like that, think about your language and your terminology, I would like to say. But for those who are going through and trying to find out their own version of womanhood, define it on your own. I know it sounds really, really basic, but the womanhood isn't about body parts. It's not about what your body can and cannot do. It's not about what you look like, or it might be about what you look like. It really actually define it on your own. There's a real archaic way of thinking, as you, like we say about, oh, you get married, you have a baby, and therefore that will make you a woman. So I just think it's about challenging when your mind goes to, oh, I wish I could. What is that? And then stand by that and talk to people. I think if you have got a trusted network of people, have those conversations, immerse in communities where you might be trans, you might be non-binary, you might be in the LGBTIQPA+. It's simple and it's complex. And that's not at all an answer. But all I've done is define it on my terms and really just come to like myself, regardless of... There's a lot of self-love and there's a lot of therapy that's had to take place as well. So it's not easy, but you can get there, I'm sure.
And would you say that you're in a good space now?
I'm a work in progress, Rena.
Okay.
Honestly. It's weird because MRKH, I always think, is like the chicken and the egg. I don't know how much of my life and my thought processes are because of this trauma or this situation, and I don't know how much of it is Ally. I will always be someone who is going to have to strategically go for self-love. It's a daily practice. Mm-hmm. I don't ever wake up and think rainbows and lollipops. I don't know who does. I don't know if, when it comes to my next relationship, how will I navigate that? Another disclosure. But I definitely have learnt my worth, and that is gold. To actually say, I am worthy of being in this space, I'm worthy of being in this relationship, I'm worthy of being in this podcast. And that's I'll take that for today. Yeah,
that is super important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really good to know that you've come to that place right now.
Self-love.
Having an insight into your journey,
mm-hmm.
it's good to know. So as well as being an author,
yes,
being a writer, campaigning, being an advocate, you also have a podcast, don't you? So tell me about that.
Stigma Shakers. Yes, I do. I was always I know what my shame and my stigma has been, but I was sitting down with a friend of mine, and we worked on a few projects together, and we were just over coffee, and I was like, I want to do more. And I just don't know what that more is, in the sense of working with, as a podcast, but working with people around stigma and taboo. And she's like, well, why don't we just explore all the stigmas and taboos? And I was like, why haven't we done that before? And so, yes, there's only 2 seasons so far. It's like a newbie podcast. But we examine all the stigmas and taboos that we face as a society. And they're not, it's not all kind of like, it's not all vaginas. And I mean, there is the stigma of masturbation, there's the stigma of sex work, but we also look at, and it's National in Loneliness Week, so we look at the stigma of loneliness, grief, divorce, a whole bunch, an amazing, another grief, because grief's a really big one. Yes, so that's the podcast, and I'm thinking about taking it live. So I'm thinking about doing like a Stigma Shakers live in London, because I want people to come together. And the resounding theme across all these episodes is shame. And that's what a lot of people carry silently, is shame. And as we know, the famous quotes out there, like, shame doesn't exist in shadows. And that's what I want to talk about, because at the end of the day, we just don't deserve to be unhappy as people.
No.
We've got to get society. We're far too polite in the UK as well about talking about stigma.
Yeah. And life is hard, right? And when you're kind of dealing with shame and stigmas, it's just unnecessarily more difficult, right?
Life is really hard. Like, even this week, the stigma of loneliness. Being as lonely is the equivalent to smoking 16 cigarettes a day. It will kill you.
What it will do for your health.
Yeah, exactly. I shouldn't say kill you. That's a bit much. But in terms of its trajectory, like, it has the power to really hurt you and really harm you. So, I mean, yeah, there is a lot of struggle behind closed doors. But as my mum so beautifully said yesterday, who's just come out, as I've been talking about earlier, a massive, massive heart operation. She said, "This isn't a sentence, Ally. Life isn't a sentence. We weren't put on this planet to be miserable. We can have joy. Let's work towards that, however that might look." So, yes.
That is really beautiful how she summed that
She's
up.
very wise.
Yeah.
Wendy's very wise.
So, Ally, what support networks are there for people who have been diagnosed with MRKH?
So fundamentally, I'll speak to the UK audience. There's a wonderful charity that I'm a trustee on. It's called MRKH Connect. We're online, on Instagram, on socials. We're a really great charity in the sense that we offer a amazing suite of sort of services we do peer online events every other month. We have a really, really big event coming up in London in July called MRKH Connect Live. I'm hosting a youth program for people under 25 for 6 weeks at the moment. So we have those every year. We have an amazing community of great people with MRKH ranging from 16 straight through to 70. And yeah, we're just a very kind of like accessible, we try to cover all bases when it comes to MRKH. So there is that, but we also have friends and partners around the world, and you can find those resources also on MRKH Connect website.
And if there's somebody who is watching or listening that has just been diagnosed with MRKH, what would you like them to know straight away?
When you're ready, because the overwhelm, it can be too much, and the idea of talking to a stranger about something so intimate and, or a parent, actually, sometimes the parents reach out, is that when you are ready, there is a huge community of people willing to welcome you into our family that you'll forever be a part of for as long as you want, but also to know that everything you're feeling it's not okay what's happened, but the feelings that you have are okay, as in, don't hide them, don't push them down, don't feel bad about them. You're exactly where you're meant to be, but please know there is so much help. There is so much help out there. And please get in touch with, MRKH Connect, or if you just want that one-on-one person to message, then my inbox is always open on Instagram. Yeah.
Ally, just want to say thank you so much for coming and sharing. I feel like I've learned so much about MRKH, and I feel like I've learned so much about you from this book as well. And thanks for just being so honest and so open about everything that you've experienced and for the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you so much, Rena, and to you and the fabulous team here. It's been an absolute great conversation, and I've really, really enjoyed it. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for watching. I hope that you have taken something away from this podcast episode. Please do share it with people that you know. Give it a bit of love. Subscribe to the Lifestyle Prescription on Pharmacy Planet. See you on the next one.